Greetings, everyone. This is Mike Riley, the voice of Ironman. And this is the Old School Tri Show with my Kiwi mates Cameron Harper and Brian Ashby. The show that talks about all things triathlon, old and new. We're powered by Ansco Foods, bringing you nutrition and good health from New Zealand's beef and lamb. Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy the show.
Welcome along to the Old School Tri Show, brought to you by our great friends at Ansco Foods. And Brian, legends in triathlon and specifically for Ironman New Zealand come in all forms, and today we're lucky enough to definitely be talking to a legend.
Yeah, a little bit different today. We're aiming to speak to all the winners of Ironman New Zealand from over its 40 editions. Of course, we've also spoken to the voice of Ironman, Mike Riley. Today, a little bit different. You might have heard of the Tony Jackson Scholarship. Tony Jackson, a 28-time competitor at Ironman New Zealand. Sadly, we lost him a few years ago. His wife, Verna Cook-Jackson, well, look, she's been there from the go-get, from 1985, from every capacity, from volunteer, technical official, and many, many times competitor and coach. Verna joins us in a moment.
Ansco Foods is proud to be the new naming partner of Ironman New Zealand, ensuring every stroke, pedal and stride is powered by the best nature has to offer. Ansco Foods is on a mission to bring nutrition and good health from New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Ansco Foods, putting the iron in Ironman with New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Visit anscofoods.com/Ironman to find out more.
Verna, fantastic to have you joining us on the Old School Tri Show. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions here just to explain to people your background and so on within the sport. So there's going to be a few numbers here I'm going to get you to throw back at us. The first one's not related to Ironman at all. It's to marathon running. You have this remarkable record with the Rotorua Marathon. How many times have you done the Rotorua Marathon?
I didn't realise you realised that. But that's a nuisance because it's almost an embarrassment now. 43 years in a row, yes. But in saying that, the last few years is almost pathetically bad, but fun. In fact, I've probably had more fun in the last few years than what I did in the days when we were serious. If we could be serious. So 43 years, and my sons have just told me today that they've already entered for the 44th one. And
You must have started that streak when you were still at primary school, Verna.
Oh, you're so lovely. I love you. I always knew you were a man of style in class.
Oh, smooth-talking devil, isn't he? How many other marathons have you done over and above Rotorua?
People ask me that, and I've never sat down to actually count them, but about 180. But in saying that, I was in the heyday of when I was one of those women when women didn't run marathons, so in New Zealand. So I was in the heyday, and there was no such thing as a triathlon. And women either played tennis or netball or hockey, and it didn't do marathon running. So in the heyday, you did 5 or 6 a year. You didn't know any better. You just thought, oh, there was Hamilton and there was Palmerston and Wellington or Rotorua or Whangarei or Bulla.
Did you do any overseas? Did you travel overseas, friend?
Interesting, yeah. Took a group, very first time I travelled overseas, took a group to Hawaii to do the Hawaii Marathon. And that was about 1981, I think, 1982. Oh. And then went and did another group with a travel company in Auckland to New York. And it was after the New York one, I thought to myself, and it's the same with Ironman, I thought, why am I doing these overseas ones? Because when you go away, you have to train, or you're thinking the whole time about the event. And when we took groups, of course, I had to look after everybody else and was organising passports and things like that. So it was really time-consuming and quite hectic. So I decided after the New York one, no more overseas marathons. And then, so I haven't. I've been to watch them. And the same as with Ironman. I went to watch Tony in 1993. He was doing, I think, his third Kona. And I went up there, and everybody had always had this thing about doing Kona, and I went as a support crew up there. And we were in the VIP bus that went out on the bike course and wherever we went. And I just remember sitting on that bus going out on that bike course over through the lava fields, in the heat, with a headwind, looking out the bus window thinking, oh, why would I want to do this? And so I never desired to do Kona, which shows you I haven't really been a very good competitive person. I have qualified, and there's been times on the roll down where I could have gone. But just the whole concept of going over and sweating about everything and worrying and fretting and getting, it's so, I've always been a really nice, enthusiastic supporter of overseas Ironman events and marathons.
So yeah, you're a terrible competitor because you've only done about 180 marathons.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many? Still on the numbers. How many times have you done Ironman?
15.
15. Wow.
15.
And you've been there essentially every day since every year since the start.
Yep.
Ironman
Yep.
New Zealand, and this podcast is around the 40 years of Ironman New Zealand. You've been there from day one, 1985.
40 years, every single year. I haven't missed one. And I remember those first 2 years and going down there. And they didn't have volunteers as such. It was just like an organising group. Paul Gleason's and co that were doing it. And I remember, and I knew 4 people that were doing the Ironman. And Tony and I weren't a couple at that time. He was married somewhere else, and so was I. And but he was a fellow runner. We used to run with him a lot. And another girl called Sue Price and a couple of other people, Eric Stevens and John Holton. Yeah, there were 5 people we knew, and another guy called Bob Dick. And I couldn't work them out. They were very tiny at that stage. It was about 42 or something. Or no, 50. I'm not sure. But I liked these people, and I thought they were sensible and intelligent. And I went down to watch them do what I thought was the stupidest thing out. Honestly, one of them was a professor, another one was a doctor, and thinking, these people are intelligent. Why are they doing this? So I remember going down to watch that very first one at Mission Bay. And the next year, my girlfriend was quite a bit older than me, we decided we were going to volunteer. So we were literally, the men were getting ready on their stools, they didn't have wetsuits then, but putting their gear on. And my friend Eileen and I had big jars of Vaseline that somebody had given us. And we were going around offering to Vaseline all the crutches. So a bit of fun trying to leave it, but we did. And I remember at the time, I was younger than her, so it probably wasn't quite as kosher, but she was in her 50s at that stage, and she would be going up saying, "Want your crutch done? Want you with this big jar of Vaseline?" Because that's all you used for lubricants in those days.
Yeah.
So yes,
it was like the Cook Strait swimming, wasn't it? They vest the whole bodies up, didn't they, with open water swims and things?
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course it was the harbour, and you never knew what sort of temperature it was going to be. But yes, I've been to every single one in some form or another in those first few years. Then I became an official volunteer a few years after that. And never really dreamt of doing it because I was never a swimmer. I couldn't swim. I had a great fear of the water, huge fear of the water. Even when my children were small, my biggest fear was that they would get caught in the water and I wouldn't be able to save them. So I could never swim a stroke until I was 40. So, yeah. Anyway, next question.
just with that, so you've gone, you've seen the first one, suddenly you're volunteering and with your jar of Vaseline and stuff, but along the way, somewhere along the way there, are you a lot like every other triathlete? It's like, I'd kind of like to have a go. I'm not really a swimmer. You started small and just ticked off the steps and ended up sort of going along. How did it evolve for you?
No, not at all. But I always did want to get over my fear of swimming. And I never had the desire. No, it didn't. And what happened was Tony ended up being a solo dad, and he at the same time lost his job. And I'm going back to the 80s, late 80s, maybe 90. And so he was always helping other people. So he ended up running what we called the unemployed swim group. So he was teaching adults, friends who couldn't swim and he only hung a swimming pool on, I think it was a Tuesday and a Thursday night. So we would just turn up and he taught a lot of us to swim, non-swimmers completely. So there were a few Ironman people, but there was only really like about 10 people would come along, and he did it for free. And then he taught us to swim, and then he'd take us out to the sea, Auraki, that little Auraki basin, and teach us to swim. And it was just that confidence. And even at that stage, I didn't want to do it. And then in those days, in the early 90s or maybe late 80s, Phil Bryars and Ken Henderson we were running, mostly Ken Henderson, we were running little like masters tries, little wee ones. And so they had one at Herald Island. It was a very small one. And so my girlfriend, who was in her 50s, had said, why don't you give it a try? So I went in and did this little try. And that's probably this little Ken Henderson try. Maybe on my old 10-speed bike, because I'd never ridden a bike in my life. And I'm serious. The only way I could get this bike was to put it on lay-by. And it was an old 10-speed. And the only reason I bought that one was because it was red. So,
Good reason.
Yeah.
And because that's how much technology just wasn't into it then. And did my first little try there. And that's when I thought, and I'd never thought Ironman even then. And it wasn't till, it wasn't until a year or two later that I realised we started doing the harbour swims and things like that. And once I got the confidence in swimming, and of course my background was marathon running. So I knew I'd never be competitive speed-wise, but I knew that I had the endurance. And so I just had to learn to bike. And my girlfriend, we used to go out to her place in Manurewa and cycle those roads, which you wouldn't cycle now. It's just so busy and so built up. But in those days, it was countryside. So we'd go out on our 10 speeds and do rides out there to Clevedon and back with no traffic, no housing.
Did people think, Verna, that you, and I mean this with the greatest respect, did they think you were weird that you're getting on your 10-speed and riding it through the paddocks of Manurewa every weekend?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I remember my father being really concerned about the fact that, and I'd encouraged my older sister to come marathon running as well. My father took me aside one day and said, I really don't think what you're doing is really, it's not very woman-like. It's not at all. Because I came from a tennis background. Our family was very strong in tennis. And he said, no, it's not very, and I remember saying, why, Dad? What's the problem? He said, well, it's not good for the woman's bits, is it? All that running and cycling is not good for your bits. So I remember at the time, I really didn't want my father to tell me exactly what was going to happen to my bits. But yes.
That was your dad of that generation. And if you go back to the 74 Com Games, I don't think women ran over 1,500 metres at those.
No.
So were you like, when you got into marathon running, were you aware of the Catherine Switzers of the world and people like that? Were they kind of heroes to you?
Absolutely. Catherine Switzer was. Absolutely, yeah. So there's no doubt about it. And when she came out here, especially to Ironman, I just was like, I've never idolised anybody, but I really did her. And I still find her a really motivating person. Yes, we did, because we were in that group of women in New Zealand. There was only a small ones of us that were doing the distance running. And in fact, a lot of it we would do in the dark. We'd meet because to see us running through streets really wasn't the done thing. So when she got on the news, we remember we felt liberated. She's been on the news. People might not have seen it, but we felt justified. We could go out and run in groups. So instead of running around, I belonged to the YMCA, and we used to do all our distance running in Myers Park. Now, if you know Myers Park, you'll know how short, small, steep that is. Yeah. And we do loops and loops. So, yes, it was really a really interesting time. And of course,
jumping around a little bit, Verna, unfortunately, but you must make you incredibly proud to look back at that when it was, like you said, it was frowned upon for women to be distance running or Ironman or anything like that. And you look how far we've come now. It's amazing. You must be incredibly proud of how far everyone's come as a society, and so many women, whether you're, whatever age, whatever state, whatever, are welcome to run or Ironman or get involved,
Or rugby or boxing. Or,
Absolutely, anything.
No, it is. I am. And I feel like I was part of that era. I wasn't a pioneer, but being part of that era of doing that was amazing. In fact, that was the case with women right through, employment-wise as well. It was just an amazing era trying to get women's rights. I was never one to march for women's rights, but it was that era. In fact, it just reminded me, I remember being at university in my 20s. My kids, I didn't go till I was in my 20s and I had children. I remember going to a course at university for a whole year called Women's Studies. I mean, to have something like that now, it would be cried down. We had to go and study women.
What was that? What was that paper? What did it involve? Women's studies. What did that involve?
About women and the history of women and politics and how and in medical things and had a whole lot of things we had to write about and do research and how women. It was the beginning of the Germaine Greer era,
Yeah.
and how we should be liberated, and that was the time of ban the bra and all of that. But going to women's studies, like that was really the first of the whole of New Zealand universities having something like that. And I reflect back now, but I wouldn't have then. The lady that took it, and I can't remember her name, probably would have been a gay lady. But in those days, we didn't know what gay ladies were. And, so it was still under that cover. So yes,
It was illegal. It was illegal back
It
then.
was illegal. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember falling out
Yeah.
with quite a few people over the homosexual law reform, but that's another story. That's another
Yeah.
podcast.
So when going back to where we've gone off on the tangent, we'll reel it back in, and so your dad's a bit worried about his daughter out on the bike and doing these long runs. What I want to know, was it a Healing 10 speed that you were on? Like all of New Zealand was riding Healing 10 speeds back then?
Yes, and it was, and it hit the lady step through bar.
Yeah.
And,
Did you have the carrier on it still?
No, because I got it from
carrier
a
on.
bike shop. The bike shop wasn't even a bike shop; it was a lawnmower shop that sold bikes in Papatoetoe. So
Where was that? Was that the one in Mount Albert? Was that the Mount Albert one?
No. I wasn't living in Papatoetoe in those days.
Were you in Papatoetoe?
This
Okay.
was early 1990s, or
Because they were all mower and cycle shops in those days, weren't they?
They were. You didn't have bike shops, and it was
No.
Tony, and of course it was through Ironman that you had Uncle Sam start and all of those great sporting bike shops start then. So it was through Tony that introduced us to all of these, and there was a group of us women. There was about half a dozen of us being liberated and doing these things. It was all, and we were all mothers. We all had little kids, and we all worked as well. And so we were quite a unique little group by bicycles. Yes.
Did you develop a love for riding? I mean, you're well established as a marathon runner. Did you love riding the bike, and did you develop a love for the open water swimming as well, or was that always a bit nerve wracking?
No, both, all of it. That's what I did love, because once we did start doing Ironman, just loved the long bike rides. Absolutely loved the long bike rides, and swimming. I just grew so confident in swimming, and I was never a fast swimmer, but became a very competent swimmer. So, and of course, the first 5 or 6 Ironman I did was in the Auckland Harbour. So the nervous thing about that was you never knew what sort of water you were going to get. But I became so confident that I could swim through rough water and beat people that were much quicker. So I became very confident. Rangitoto swim, Rangitoto St Heliers swim, I did about 3 or 4 times. That sort of thing never bothered me. And the same with cycling, although that's changed now. But we used to do amazing rides from Mount Albert out to the city and out through your bike routes and botany, and then head all the way out. We'd go all the way down through to the Firth of Thames via State Highway, and just the love of it was wonderful, because the traffic wasn't like it is now. And I just loved biking, and I loved the hills. I was never fast on anything, but I was strong on the hills, and I could get up the hills, and that's about the only time I actually beat someone. Unless going down, I weighed more than a lot of people, so I used to love letting my legs go, because I weighed more. I'd pass all these lightweight, really good cyclists. I loved it, really do. So I confess to missing that cycling now, but I'm old now, so I've been there, done that. And the same with, I live at the lake now rather than the sea, and I don't swim in the lake anywhere near as much as I could do. But that's simply because I don't have swimming mates my age. That's really why. They're either too serious or just don't do it. But if I had a few more people my age, my ability, I'd probably swim a lot more. But I love it, yeah. In fact, I became a swim coach as a result of that. So, I became an Ironman coach, but I became a swim coach after being taught how to swim by Tony.
But you still, because you still got the streak for the marathon like we are talking about before, and it sounds like there was an article I remember on the television news, was it when you hit your 40th? And 40th Rotorua, but so you still go out and jog and train. I mean, you obviously stay fit.
Yes, but as I say, it's an embarrassment now, because basically I walk jog the marathon. I just walk jog, and it's a slow walk jog. So last year we broke 6 hours and cheered. And I think
That's cool.
my fastest Rotorua was 3 hours 15. And here am I
3:15.
cheering because I got in under 6 hours last year. But it's walk jog. And yes, I jog along the lake, but all I do is a 5K. If I go that way, I got a 4K. If I go that way to the marina, it's a 5K. And then I do the Spa Park run, which is a whole 8K. So, but I do that, well, probably 5 days a week at least, just to keep my fitness up there. And then the big thing for me, and has been with coaching all these years with Ironman, is I go to the gym, do strength training, lift weights.
Yeah.
Real weights, not machines, like weights. Yeah.
Proper ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Verna, in the early days of Ironman and your volunteering, what stood out to you about it that hooked you in? Was it Weekend Warriors and seeing what they were achieving, or the rock stars at the sharp end of it? What made you find this essentially the lifelong love of Ironman, a 40-year love?
You're right. Well, in the volunteering days, in those early days, particularly in Auckland, it was more the fact that so many of the athletes were from overseas, and I found that fascinating. I mean, even when we only had 500, 600, 700 athletes, you would find that 2/3 of them were from overseas. So I found that fascinating, and I loved New Zealand, so I just loved being a volunteer there. When it came to the rock stars, like the Scott Molinas and Ken Glowers, etc., and the Erin Bakers, I just was too shy to go up and talk to them, whereas other people wouldn't do. I mean, they were just heroes to me. I literally sort of idolized them like a child would do, because I thought, so we used to go into those days. They also had the big prize givings, and Tony used to go up and talk to these people, and I'd be just dumbfounded. I couldn't talk because I just didn't know what to say, because these people were professionals. So, but it was mostly in the volunteering we loved doing it was because of the amount of overseas people here, and we just found that fascinating. And it was fun in those days because it was a lot more relaxed. But I was telling somebody at Ironman this year that they used to they'd pick up their gear bags, and then they had to bring the gear bags back the next day. And we actually had to go through the gear bags. That was part of the rules. And pull out, like the bike bag. We had to pull out, make sure they had their bike helmet in there. And they had to have something like something else fluoro that was bright in the dark. And we had to make sure the shoes were in there. And we used to actually have to unpack it in front of them. And then pack it back in. And then we'd hand it in. Same with the running gear. We had to get the bag and go through and make sure they had their socks and they had their shoes and they knew that everything. So they actually got you a lot more acquainted with a lot of these overseas athletes, and we found that really good. But you could do that when there was only 500, 600, 700 athletes. And that had some experiences in itself, because I remember one guy, Belgium, funnily enough, chap came in, and he came in and he looked all scrumpled, and he had the two bags, and I pulled out the gear, and it stunk. It was really rancid, and I remember thinking, there were things like that, and then apparently I said that. Apparently, I was told off by somebody. You actually made an uck noise when you got his gear out. That wasn't very professional. It was different.
But when you're when you're volunteering, I mean, gee whiz, you see some sights, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Certainly do. Yeah. And in those days, also, they asked women to help out in the men's changing tents as well, when they came out of the swim, what have you, because they didn't have a lot of them there. And that was in the first days of having wetsuits, because I remember Scott Molina turning up in that wetsuit he talked about.
Yeah.
And then people got wetsuits, and then people were having trouble getting them off. So we were asked to go in and help pull the wetsuits off. And it was interesting. You learnt what people did. There were lots of men that swam with nothing on under the wetsuits, which used to
You saw a lot more than you expected.
No. Well, I don't know whether it was a good thing or not, but I know my girlfriend, who was renowned, the one that was in her 50s, who did Ironman at 54, her first one. It became a bit of a joke about these ladies, and we weren't the only ones. I mean, you remembered Jerry and Liz Rangers. I mean, Liz used to be in there as well, and ripping the gear off, and it was just a matter of helping. We really wanted to help. That's really what it was all about, and that way we were professional in terms of trying to help. And we did.
So tell us about bridging from volunteer and you're quietly sort of doing your swims and bits and pieces to your first Ironman. What year was your first Ironman? How did you get to the point of saying, "Yep, I'm going to do this"?
Well, 94 was my first one in Auckland. And my girlfriend, who was a 54-year-old, had done it the year before. And we'd both been volunteering for years. And she was 54. And I was only in my, what was I? Was much younger. And she inspired me. It was amazing. And in those days, of course, the cutoff was 15 hours. And she had done it. But we didn't even think anything about cutoff time. It wasn't relevant. That's what it was. Ironman had got to the big full distance. Cutoff time was 15 hours. And seeing my girlfriend at that age doing it, and also by this stage I knew quite a few other people. And then I've been doing small triathlons with them and doing ocean swims and started training with them. And it was just an easy involvement for me. And by that stage, Tony and I were a couple as well. And he was just the greatest one for playing everything down, making you confident. Nothing was ever, of course you can do anything. With a willing mind, you can do anything. And that's literally. And so by the time I went to the start line in 94, I don't think I felt a lot of nerves. I'd been around to see a lot, and I knew what I was in for the day. And I knew I wasn't competitive. I just knew I was in for quite a long day. But the roads I knew, we'd cycle them all, we'd swum the harbour. And of course, being a marathon runner, I've done marathons along that waterfront area so many times. So I know at the time I surprised myself for not being nervous. So it was just an easy easement for me. I was very fortunate to have had a girlfriend older than me doing it, to have lots of friends that had done it, and then, of course, to have Tony to have done it. And that year, that was my first year. I think we had quite a little group of about 6 of us that had been doing our training together. None of us competitive, but we didn't even think about times. It just wasn't even relevant in those days. It was just about doing an Ironman in that stage. And then I remember at the time thinking, I want to be one of these mad people. The people I thought were mad. Yeah. So, and I made lots of friends, of course, as well.
What can you remember about the conditions that first day, the people on the course, seeing Tony on the course and things? What are your sort of memories of that day?
Well, it was a fine day. We were lucky. The water was reasonably okay, just a very mild chop. I remember coming out of the swim. Oh, I had a borrowed wetsuit and it was all baggy. Everywhere. It was one of Tony's old ones he'd discarded. It was all baggy everywhere. So I'd taken a lot of water along with me as well. I remember the weather was nice. And I do also remember, because in those days, all the Auckland days, the roads weren't closed. And so we cycled all the way out, like it was the Twilight Roads and Sandstone Roads, and all the way out to the Firth of Thames, and the roads weren't closed. But of course, the traffic wasn't like it is now. But I just remember being happy. I remember going up Sandstone Road, and I knew at some stage I would see Tony on the way back, and that was so exciting when we did. It was just a lift, and I knew that I had my 54-year-old or whatever she was then girlfriend behind me, and all I had to do was keep in front of her. That was I was a little bit competitive there. There's no doubt about that. And it was and I knew so many of the athletes then. But I just remember being very happy and confident, and then cycling back through Pakuranga, coming back into St Heliers. I remember just bursting to get there, because I knew that if I got off the bike, and this is what I tell people at first time seminars, if you get off the bike, you can get to the end. So, and being a marathon runner, but even running along the waterfront or running wherever about Pakuranga, none of the roads were closed. The footpaths weren't closed, so you were still competing with the public and dogs and cats and pushchairs and prams. But I remember also being focused and quite focused at the time. And I think it was my second one I did in Auckland. A friend of mine, husband and wife, that had done it a couple of years earlier. At that stage, it went into the Viaduct Basin area, right? So we went past the ferry buildings into the Viaduct Basin, did a turnaround, and friends of mine were standing there, and they had a thermos flask of coffee. And at that time, there were no rules really, and they said, "Do you want a coffee?" I said, "Oh yes, please." So they poured me a black coffee, and I never drink. And I remember drinking it and thinking, "Wow!" And it gave me a real buzz. In those days, there wasn't anything about not allowed outside assistance.
Yeah.
In fact, even on the bike, and I remember reading in the very first or second rules of Ironman where they said there are no special foods in any stations. If you need special food, you take your own foods. So remember, our backpacks were full. Not only did we have to carry our own tools and equipment because you weren't allowed assistance on the bike if anything went wrong, so you carried all your tools, but the back was full up with Marmite and cheese sandwiches, loads of that. But I remember having a coffee there and finding out the benefits of a really strong caffeine there. And the following year, you're going to disqualify me now, aren't you? Because the following year, they were in Mission Bay, and I think McDonald's had only just opened in Mission Bay, and they were standing there with a coffee and a cheeseburger. And I remember grabbing it and eating it, and it was the greatest thing. I think it was the first lap because he had to get back out. It was the greatest thing. It might have been the last. I can't remember. And ever since then, people always knew the fact that Verna would always have a burger. So, yeah. And then the rules came in, you couldn't have them. But people would actually be putting cheeseburgers in trees along the roadside. Yeah.
I remember that there used to be the thing is that all the trees around Mission Bay and Koei and stuff would be full of burgers all the way up and down that people were stashing in different trees. It's like, right, go past the toilets at Koei, the third tree will have a burger in it, and that's yours.
Exactly. Everybody would tell you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And when cell phones came in, it was better because they could all tell each other where she was. And I used to belong to the YMCA, and they always had an aid station out by the rescue helicopter area there.
Yep.
And funnily enough, they always had a burger on the table there by coincidence, knowing I was coming through. But the reality was, in the end, I mean, I would uplift them, and I very rarely would eat them in the end, but I didn't want that. It became a thing, and I didn't want people to know. So the next bin or wherever I could, I'd dispose of it because I didn't need it. We were wise in those days and knew how to do nutrition anyway. But yeah,
Burgers.
So in answer to that question, Brian, which was ages ago, I remember being quite happy, confident, coming out, and everything about it went tickety-boo. It was lovely, and managed to do it in under 15 hours. And that course.
Tough course.
At 42 or 43 or whatever I was at the time. Yeah.
With so many people at Ironman New Zealand over the years have had Mike Riley's words tattooed into their brain. You are an Ironman. So what was it like? Mike wasn't there then, of course, in Auckland. What can you remember about the finish of your first one or two?
I loved it because I loved the announcer they had then, Russell Williams. He had he was a fine man. He was such a gentleman. And through being a volunteer, I'd sort of got to know him a little bit. He was, but he was such an upright, good-looking, fine, well-spoken man. And I used to love standing on the sideline as a volunteer, hearing him cheer on the finishers, the Ken Glass and whatever they were there in Bakers. And I remember wanting him to, I wanted him to say my name as I came across and that, to me, it's like people have found with Mike Riley in latter years, but having Russell call out my name was just something really superb, and I just couldn't wait for that finish line. But I also knew that Tony was standing on the other side waiting for me until one year I beat him, which I did a lot in the latter years. But in those days in Auckland, there was 1 year I actually came in ahead of him. So
did you wait for him at the finish line?
Yes. In fact, in the latter years, when it became less and less competitive down here, we would wait for one another up the end of the finish where the trees are in the dark.
Yeah.
We would wait for one another. And then he'd say, "Don't go now. Someone else will be in the limelight down there. Wait till there's nobody there." We seriously would.
Yeah.
So we've and the three of us have all known each other for so long, and we just talk away like we do. But we haven't actually talked. We're talking about Tony, but we need to actually bring that to some context. We're talking about Tony Jackson, one of the OGs of Ironman New Zealand. Started in '85, got through 28 Ironman New Zealand's in the end, wasn't it, Verna, before he passed, and now have the Tony Jackson Scholarship that's named after Tony and his memory. And we'll get onto the scholarship a little bit in a minute. But when you first met Tony, you were saying you first met him, that was back in the Auckland days.
Yeah. Well, I was married with kids. He was married with kids, and it just so turned out that his wife used to go to school with my husband at the time. So, and we ended up being social friends. And I thought he was a right plonker. I really did. He was a Pommy Blanca. He used to, in those days, when they first came out from England, he had two children or one children or something when I first met him. I remember him coming in, he had a beard and he had a paisley shirt and purple bell-bottoms. And sandals. Yeah. So that was in the early 80s. So you can, it was in the early 80s. And it was through us that Tony actually started marathon running because I was part of the YMCA Marathon Club. And so I got to know him through marathon running, doing all the training there and lots of marathon runs. And so it was through that I got to, and so I trained with him for a number of years. I still thought he was plonker right up until he ended up being, his wife was a race walker, a Commonwealth Games race walker, and we had the Commonwealth Games here in Auckland, and Tony ended up being the director of the Commonwealth Games race walkings, the men and the women's over at Devonport, and he was also on the organising committee. And that was when my view of him changed, because I saw a working man. He was working full-time. He had 2 kids. His wife was training full-time. He was looking after kids. He was doing all this race directing on the Commonwealth Games. And I saw the integrity of the man. Up until then, I'd been quite different. So my views sort of him, I began to respect him instead of thinking he was a proper Pommy plonker. And then we started doing special marathon training seminars for people as well. And then his marriage broke up and then my marriage broke up. And then we started doing the swimming together. And in the end, I ended up hero worshipping from that time on, and I still did till he died. He was just an incredible person, very quiet. He was never boosted himself, never promoted himself, and he always cared about his fellow men, which is why the scholarship to me is important, because the person has to fit in with the genre that I believe Tony was. And all of them have in one degree or another. And Tony used to give to everybody else to the sacrifice of himself. And I'd seen that through the years. And last year's one was Adam Somerville, who was the Tony Jackson Ironman, who had mental health problems. And what people don't know about Tony is that he had 2 years of the black dog. This is long before he came to New Zealand. Yeah, so and he talked to me about that a lot, which is why Adam was a primo candidate.
Yeah.
And also both of us were developed sports asthma. So this year's one just fitted in beautifully as well, because it went to the history of it. Both Tony and I had sports-induced asthma, which a lot of athletes find. So we used to have to take our puffers with us, along with our cheese and Marmite sandwiches and bike pumps and tyres and tubes, have our puffers. And interestingly enough, I think it was about 1990s, the International Athletic Federation started to ban certain drugs. And we had to get our doctors to sign a document to say that we were truly asthmatics and that we weren't carrying our puffers to give us a benefit. I remember that. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I keep changing the question and the answer.
I just want to share a quick Tony story. 2012, it must have been 2012. It was a turn from Ironman and Taupo to the 70.3 the next day. I remember Tony racing there that day. And he got, because I used to always stress like anything, myself and Brian and Mike Riley and, people like Ian Heppenstall and all of us guys that were in there. We used to stress where the heck is Tony Jackson, and also Mike Ramsey, because Mike did 33 finishes at Ironman New Zealand. And it was always like, where's Tony? Where's Mike? And we thought for the half they'd be okay. Mike arrives. I said, where the heck's Tony Jackson? He goes, he's back there a wee bit. Anyway, Tony gets to the end and said, where you been? Like I was telling him off. He said, I'm not a schoolboy. He gave me that sort of look of, stop coming at me. He said, well, I get in trouble if I tell you. I said, no, of course you won't. He said, I've been at the 2 Mile Bay Yacht Club drinking beer.
Yeah. He borrowed money off a lady. He said he got $10. All those years he'd run past that 2 Mile Bay Yacht Club and people would be sitting there, and he always used to say, I don't love the beer. So yes, he did. He went back in and bought a pint of beer.
Brilliant. And
I remember telling that to somebody latterly, long after you'd passed, to a senior athlete whose names won't be mentioned, mentioning that, who immediately turned to me and said, he should have been disqualified for that. And we all knew it was Tony's last one. We all knew that the brain tumour, because of the brain tumour, he wouldn't do another one. So, and he knew that as well. So having that beer after all those years, yes, he did.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He wasn't going to get
I
this one.
didn't realise he'd told you that. Well, he could have got disqualified.
No, he's not going to get. I was like, no, you're right, mate. You can tell me anything. You're fine.
Yeah, no, he was a hero. And when he was diagnosed with the brain tumour, like you've heard the story before, I suppose, but I do love telling it. It says something about the man. And he was given 10 to 12 weeks to live. And he was getting radiotherapy and chemotherapy every day. And so he said to all the, well, that's the end of Ironman for me. That was 2012. No, it wasn't 2007 or 2008. Whatever. He was in his 10th week of getting chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and the specialist in Auckland Hospital had said, we have to close the machines down later in the week for our annual maintenance, so you won't be getting radiotherapy. And we were at Auckland Hospital, and he turned to me saying, for Ironman, you have to check in on the Thursday, he said. So he said, do I get radiotherapy on the Thursday? And they said, no. It'll be closed Fridays. Anyway, we went into it, and he said to me, we could get the radiotherapy done, and then we could get down and still be able to check in for Ironman by 5 o'clock, which was the check-off time. And I said, sure. That was on the Monday. So we loaded the car up with the bikes, went to Auckland Hospital, got his radiotherapy, jumped in the car, and the chemotherapy we took with us, so he could do that. Got down, registered, and he had spoken, and when he got there, the first thing he did was go and speak to Jane Patterson, who was race director, and say, I want to do it. And also then on to Lucy, the doctor, the amazing doctor. She was great.
Yes, she was.
Yeah, when he spoke to her, and she said, well, how many weeks have you got to live? And he said 2. Well, she said, you might as well do it at Ironman then. So they allowed him to do it. But the interesting thing was he had scarring, and he still had staples in his head around here. So we had to bandage him up, and we got permission for a friend of ours who was a nurse to be our accompanying kayaker. So we got official permission. And we bandaged them all up, and he had all of this stuff. He had to get up extra early in the morning for his chemotherapy, and then get down there. And then the gun went off, and we just waited until everyone went, because I'd said to him, if you get there, we'll do it together. So we swam together side by side, started way at the back, and we had the kayaker there, because the big thing was he couldn't get near another swimmer in case he got hit and kicked in the head because of all the staples he still had in his head. Anyway, we did the swim. I can't remember. It was the slowest time, but it was still something like 1:28 or 1:30. Oh, it might have been 1:38, something like that. And then that day, it was a horrible wet day. And we went out on the bikes, and of course we didn't cheat at all. We rode, did the right distance, got on the bikes, and it rained all day on the bike out to Reparoa. And I would just cycle past him when it was time for him to tell him to eat, because he would get all carried away. So I'd cycle past and say, time to eat, time to eat. So we did this the whole way and got off the bike. And then we did the run together, and it was horrible. It was dark, it was cold, it was miserable, it was windy as can be. It was just the pits. And here's this man who had taken chemotherapy that morning in the morning, and only had another 8 hours before his next lot of chemotherapy, staples in his head. He only had 2 weeks to live. And he did it. He never moaned, he never groaned, he just did it. And he just had the biggest smile on his face when he finished. And I remember us walking back to the motel we were at, and he just put his arm around me and said, pretty cool, eh? Yeah. So, I mean,
Pretty cool.
Interesting, yeah. And then he did 4 more after that. And he was supposed to be dead. So, anyway.
It sounded like your time with Tony, regardless of, before or after all his health issues, is and the cancer that he got. It sounded like it was one heck of an adventure. You just never quite knew what was going to be around the corner with Tony, did you?
No. We went out 1 year. I wasn't doing Ironman, and he went out training. It was about 3 years later than that, and I decided, he's fine. And we went out training with his mate, and it was early January or mid-January. He went training up Kumu way out there, and I get this phone call from Doug, his mate, to say, something's up with Tony, and you need to come and get him. He's fallen off his bike. Anyway, he had a stroke while he was out there. So I went up and picked him up and rushed him back to hospital, Auckland Hospital. And he'd had a stroke. It wasn't major, but enough to paralyse whole one side while he was on his bike back at Kumu. And so I went to Auckland Hospital emergency. And by that stage, they knew him quite well. But I remember at 11 o'clock at night, I remember one of the doctors coming in just to double check on him. We're in those cubicles where everybody is. And they pull the curtain, and there he is. He's leaning on the back of the bed, and he's trying to get this hand that wouldn't work, to get the hand up to try and touch his nose. He was trying to get it to work, and he was trying to stand because his whole side had gone. He got out of bed, and I was there to hold him, but no, he just said, "Oh, I've had a stroke. This is not working. I've got to get it working." And I remember the look on the doctor's face. "What are you doing?" I said, I've got to get it working. And that was mid-January, and he was at the start line, beginning of March. So, I didn't know what I was ever going to get. No, you just never knew. Spent a lot of time in hospitals, and he had about 6 major surgeries. They took his whole scalp off once. He had to turn it around. Took it all off, turned it around, stitch it back on. So you never know. Yeah, and he wasn't mad on training. I mean, the most training we ever did, even in our heyday, I think there would only be a 2-week period where we would have done something like 18 hours training. And it was only on the days when we did the 7-hour bike rides. So most of our training, because we were both working corporate until he got sick, but we would only maximise 12 to 14 hours training a week. So, I look at what they're doing now and the intensity now, and I think, don't be so intense. Get real. Anyway, I've got sidetracked again.
So all these sort of races you're doing together, and sort of the years sort of roll on, and you've accumulated quite a few. What did you think about your thoughts on when Ironman shifted south from Auckland, your home patch, to Taupo? What were your sort of initial thoughts on that, and how it evolved the first year or two? Because of course the first year was bucketed with rain and all of those things.
Hated it. Thought it was the worst mistake. Went to Jane Patterson and said, "Why did you do this? Why did you move it from Auckland? Auckland was such a great course, blah, blah, blah." Because we didn't know the ins and outs of how they could get things done. Hated it, really, and came down here, thought, what a cold hole. And it was. And it was a horrible day. And I remember going to the Shell service station on the Sunday afterwards, and the woman behind the counter, and I said to her, "Oh, it must have been good for your business." And she bitched terribly about how bad it was for business and how Ironman was bad. And she actually triggered something in me. And I thought, she would have had more business on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the Sunday, Monday than she would have ever had on those days. So she might not have got much on the Saturday, but those other. And I thought, she switched something, and it made me think about it a little bit different. But I hated it. And of course, in those days, it was all forestry out on Reparoa Road.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there was no views. You just got forestry, and it was horrible, and it was monotonous. And there was no Sandstone Hill, Twilight Road, no going over the Firth of Thames, and
Yeah.
so really moaned and bitched as much as everybody else did. So didn't like it at all. But within about 2 years, it completely changed. We realised what a great place to have it.
And what changed it was the beauty of the swim, the lovely run around the water. What changed it for you? Was it just the penny sort of dropped?
I would say probably the local people, the support. That was in Auckland. The roads weren't closed. Nothing. You were on your own. You didn't have support out there. You were miles out in the boat, miles back along the waterfront. People were annoyed at you running there. Here, the roads were closed or semi-closed. The population came out along the waterfront. It was twice out the lake. It was that support, and it just made it easier for the athlete, and that's what it was. And of course, we were coaching people then in those days too, and seeing the difference it made to the people that were newbies that we had, seeing the difference that they had, the different experience, and they got a far more uplifting experience because of the. And I'm not saying volunteers, I'm saying the whole population that was out. Even on wet night, there were still people out there. And that literally changed it. Yeah.
That's still the magic of the event, isn't it? The whole town of Taupo embracing in a way that in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin, Hamilton, they couldn't do that.
No. So it is magic. So, and I remember at the time, there was a time there was talk about it going to Rotorua, and I always used to love Rotorua because of my affiliation with the marathon. But I remember at the time thinking, no, don't go, don't take it away. And I remember saying that. I think it was still Jane Patterson at the time. No, don't take it, don't let it go to Rotorua. It has to stay in Taupo. Not that we had any influence, but I remember not wanting it to go. No, it's a marvellous, yeah.
And you're right about the support that Ironman gets, because I remember the Auckland days, and if you were into sport or anything like that, you'd go and do it. But there were more people on the waterfront in the latter years that were there to, teach their kid to ride, or they're at Kohi Beach hanging out and having a barbecue or taking the dog for a walk or something like that. And they're like, who are these annoying people? And I remember going to Taupo, and you're right, even now, after 40 years, you still see people and they turn up every single year. They're not volunteers. They don't know anyone in the race. They don't know anything. It's just what you do. And, Brian and I, between commentary stints, we might go stand on the side of the road at the turnaround in the dark and support people. And over, there's people that could be young, they're old, they're whatever. It doesn't matter. And they're cheering people's names. And it's just what you do at Ironman weekend.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, now they've got names on the race numbers, which does make a big difference too. So the athletes think these people know me, but because it's the names. So that makes a huge difference. So I hope they never change that as well. There have been so many changes I won't do there. But I hope that they keep those names on those race numbers. It makes a difference. And of course, the Taupo one's a special colour. So usually the local paper puts something up, letting people know that as well. No. In fact, you just reminded me, I've got a friend who's 90. She still volunteers. She was in bike transition this year, 90.
Really? Was she in there volunteering with Cam Brown?
No, she was down on the aid station, the water station. She was in the bike transition.
Okay. I think he was in the bike transition on the Friday.
Friday,
doing bikes.
Yeah, no, the day of the event.
On the day. That's incredible, though, that she wants to help and wants to contribute and does so. And that's a beautiful thing about the sport. You don't have to be an athlete to be involved.
No, and I think that's made a difference to the Taupo people as well. They feel involved. They actually feel involved. Yeah, so it's a super thing. In fact, you've just reminded me. Boy, I haven't got it there. Can't reach it. Can you see? Cameron Brown showed you one of those. That there. Can you see what it is?
Yeah.
It's a double brown can.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And it's sponsored, and every athlete got one. And above it, there is a Kiwi lager can.
Kiwi lager.
So Cam Brown might have them, but he doesn't have full one. These ones are full. They're still full.
Wow. It's amazing to have them burst.
It's amazing. Just it's a bit of a reminisce. It was one of the things that Ron Skelton. Ron's done a bunch of these races now. Just recently completed his 37th, I think it was, Ironman New Zealand, and Ron was like, best thing I could have at the finish line, a full double brown. I was like, well, mate, if you can find one, good luck to you. Bring two.
Yes, so it's normally it's in the garage. I put it up there specifically. It's the same with over here. There's a poster here. I don't know whether you can see it. Oh, you can't. Yep. Anyway, it's Kiwi lager poster. It hangs in my garage, and I thought, I'll stick that up there. And I know I've got every poster. In those days, everybody got a poster. That doesn't happen anymore. And so there were, I think Mike Ramsey lent them a few this year, but I've got them all here. So it hangs in my garage. Kiwi lager on TV. It's really, you might as well have Rothmans or something like that. Catch it now. Sorry,
Verna,
digressing.
Digressing is great. You mentioned a wee while ago, you just sort of touched on it, coaching. So you've been an awesome role model to so many people and inspired lots of people. When did that sort of become a part of your repertoire?
Well, that was, again, another evolving thing from Tony, because he just automatically coached people without coaching them, We were just hangers-on. And it evolved with Tony and I then training. Other friends and we'd just say to our friends, come, you come with us, come join us on our long bike rides. And that evolved. And then also Tony was always a sports master. In his young days in Britain, he was a weightlifting coach, and he did weightlifting. So he was always conscious of having man boobs because of his history of weightlifting. He was a very good weightlifter. Anyway, that was in his early days. And in those days, he learned sports massage. And so he always did sports massage. When I first knew him, he used to do sports massage. And then I went to some sports massage courses at AUT and started doing it as well. And then Tony doing the coaching, and then it just became a joint thing. And then he would come to me and say, so-and-so's worried about this. What do you think about that? So then we ended up being joint coaches. And then when he passed away, or when he got sick with a brain tumour, I took on the athletes he had, and they were happy before that, for me to do it. So then I just became the full-time coach for them, really. And then it just kept going that way until in fact, until I moved down here in 2016, I kept coaching. And the reason that we did the coaching, and both of us loved it and got a lot out of it, was because in those earlier days of the, trying to think, 90s or early 2000s, when there were more coaches around, most of them were wanting to coach the podium athletes. There weren't a lot of people wanting to coach, the poor old broken down old fellow, or the woman like me, or hang on, no, but yeah, so we tended to get those sort of people come to us and they find out about us, and they always had a history, and a couple of them had been to other coaches before, but those coaches couldn't relate. Just in those days, they couldn't relate. It's changed now. And they just weren't interested in those people. So we ended up with them. And so we had some amazing journeys with certain people, really amazing journeys. And it was just a matter of just time and listening and adapting the program to suit them and their lifestyle and what their life was all about. So, I just could go on forever about the different individuals that we coached, who we worked magic with, simply because we had empathy. We could understand, particularly me, not being able to swim till I was 40, not doing it till I was in my 40s. And women had all sorts of problems. And a lot of the men were ex-rugby players or football players or ex-athletes. They used to do 2-hour 30 marathons, and then they were broken down and they had bung knees. And teaching people to swim, that was the most joyous thing, I think, of all the Ironman things. I think teaching people to swim is the easiest and the most rewarding thing you can do for somebody. It's not a hard thing if you can just get people on board. So the amount of people we both, and I ended up teaching to swim, was amazing, and just seeing the change in them, it was just great. Yeah, so if you've got something you can give someone else, it's the best reward you can get.
It's beautiful, Verna, and you're very good at it. One of the other things you do at Ironman, and you do a lot of, is first timer seminars and looking after, sort of being a bit of a mother hen, as it were, to some of the first timers. I mean, talk us through that. I mean, that must be incredibly rewarding as well.
Yeah, I love that word, mother hen. It was said to me first at Ironman. That's when I realised I'm old. So, what was the question? Talk about the first timers. Well, Tony used to run the first time seminars before he was sick. So, and then when he got the brain tumour, we did them together, because quite often he'd lose track, and then I'd just pull it back on. So he still did it, and I'd just pull him back into what we were talking about. And then when he passed, they just asked me. I think it was Jeanette Douglas then, and said, can you continue with them? And then every year they ask, and I keep saying to them, you really want this? This has been going on for X amount of years. Isn't it old hat? And they, no. And then every year when I go, I realise afterwards it was worth it. And the whole point of my doing it really was to take the edge off the seriousness of it, was to make it lighthearted but still real. And because too many people, especially now in the last decade, have taken it too seriously. You get them down here and you see these guys and women that just look like normal people, and they're fretting because they hear all the stories what other people have done, and we haven't done enough training, and they're so tense. So it's trying to get the tension out of them, and and I do make it flippant, but by the same token, I do make it relevant. And then I think, I often think, is it worthwhile? And then I had a guy come up to me on Sunday in town, telling me he remembered one thing that I said, and on the Saturday, he said that thing made a difference to me. Yeah. So it was all about just keep moving. Whatever you do, just keep moving. He said, I just keep thinking that all day. Just keep moving. I said that. So I'm thinking,
You probably don't realise, Verna, how much of a relatable person you are. You're very good at relating to anybody, regardless if they're some sort of big high flyer or just the everyday Joe. You are a very relatable person and communicate and disarm people very well. So it makes perfect sense that you have so much success with people who are a bit nervous about what's going to happen and what's in front of them.
Yeah. Yes. And that's cool. If I can help 10 people get a little less wound up and tense on the start line, that's good. Yeah. And I feel more good about that than anything else, really. So that's why. So I guess one year they'll not ask me, and then I'll get all miffed and I'll sulk.
Oh, they'll keep asking. I mean, what were the numbers this year, Cameron? I'm trying to work it out, but it's kind of almost half the field of first timers generally.
There's over.
Yes,
It was well over 600, like 640 or 680. There's 600 odd first timers. Yeah, there's a bunch of people, and it was amazing how many people that turn up to do Ironman. And it's something I often ask at the warm up things on the Thursday night. I'll say, how many people it's their first Ironman? They celebrate the first timers, and it's like, how many people is this their first triathlon? There's a bunch of people say, yeah, me.
Yes.
It's
yes.
like, well, go big, get into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm still amazed at that because I just know how many years it took me to get there. No, just all those little ones. So kudos to them in every way. Yeah, so they deserve it. Well, though somebody did come up to me on the Monday or the Tuesday after Ironman and said, I came to your first time. Sorry, my partner came to your first time seminar and did it. And I said, oh, did you both do it? Yes, we both first timers. And she went to the seminar and she did well. I said, how did you go? He said, I didn't finish. So my immediate reaction was, well, you didn't come to the first time seminar. So I don't know. And then I sort of put my hand on his shoulder and I said, no, I'm just teasing. So he did have something genuine go wrong.
Yeah. And with those first timers, I guess a recurring theme that we've spoken about over the last wee while is often about swimming and learning to swim. And I guess, is that the biggest thing that you encounter at those seminars, the anxiety around the swim?
Yeah. The swim is the big thing. And of course, I was kicking myself all day on the Saturday with Ironman here that I actually didn't emphasise about how the lake could chop up because it had been so smooth for so long. And then that was a really unusual circumstances. And I was out on that. Well, I got up early in the morning in the dark because I was volunteering at 4:30 over there. And then I looked at the lake and I just did an internal panic and regret that I hadn't emphasised how the water can change. And I felt really bad about it. And then I was out on the boat, out there looking at it when it happened. And I just felt nothing but overwhelming guilt almost that I didn't emphasise to the people how this could happen. And yet it has happened before. Remember the year there was so many that just didn't finish. And there were a lot that didn't finish on this one. And I felt, an overwhelming guilt at not emphasising that. And yet I do emphasise the swim at the first time seminars. I spend more time on the swim than I do on the biking and the running because it's because of that. That is the big thing that bothers people the most is the swim.
Yeah.
Yes. So that
what are your favourite things that keep you engaged and wanting to remain involved in the sport? I mean, you're so engaged that you've even shifted from Auckland to Taupo, for heaven's sake. You're so locked in. What is it that's got you on that lock?
That's a good question because I don't really know the answer. But I did not move to Taupo because of Ironman. So I was widowed 3 years and I just wasn't getting over it. I knew I had to move somewhere. This place was the last place on earth I would ever have dreamt of being here. So I had other lovely places to go to, beach places, sea places. And then in the end, it just made sense. Nothing to do with Ironman at all.
Yeah.
Although people don't. It was really to do with location and an airport. Yeah. I needed to be near an airport. So it was just a coincidence that I was here. And I really thought I was going to pull back. I gave up coaching. I gave up sports massage. I just wanted to start a new life. And I thought, no, I'll step back. I'll be stepping back from Ironman. It will just happen naturally. But it hasn't. And I think the first thing that happened was I just moved down here. And Wayne Redden rang me up one day and said, oh, no, it's me. He said, there's a women's group here and they've asked me to go and talk to them. He said, I'm not, me, I'm not a talker. I'm just wondering if you could step in and do it. So I thought, yeah, okay. I imagine a bunch of Presbyterian women, 6 or 7 of them, 3, 5 minute, 10-minute talk to them. And I found out they had to talk to about 40 women and they were the echelon of Taupo. And I had to speak for an hour on Ironman and the average age was about 75. I'm thinking, how am I going to entertain? No wonder he pushed it off on me. How am I going to entertain a bunch of 75-year-old woman, that many, for an hour on Ironman? That was probably the link back into Ironman because it turned out to be great. I just thought of my audience and so I made it entertaining for them. But and from there, I saw, and it's interesting, it's rather like doing an event. I saw the their eyes light up in these older women, and they'd all knew about Ironman. They'd all been involved. Their kids or son-in-law or daughter-in-law or nephew or grandson had done it, but they didn't know a lot about it. And I could see them sitting there. And my sense of public speaking is if you see people nodding off, you know you're boring them. And I kept looking at every one of these women, and none of them were nodding off. Their eyes were glued. And I thought, I've got them. And they're looking at Ironman from a completely different perspective now. And that's how the link didn't drop through Wayne Reardon not wanting to speak to this bunch of women for an hour. And because I ended up being invited to join the group, and then I got to speak at Rotary and U2, 3, 4, whatever they were, and became part of the Taupo community. And I'd only just moved here. And I honestly, apart from Wayne Reardon, and I didn't know him that well, he would have been the only person I knew down here. I had a couple of friends that moved here 5 months earlier, but I just knew no one here. It was just a big leap of me, okay, change my life. And in the end, my life stayed with Ironman. It didn't really change that much. But I became part of that community as a result of that. So it's enabled me to be part of the community as well. So I'm grateful for that. Yeah. And Ironman, I mean, even on Monday, I turned up at a function and the guest speaker didn't turn up. So they asked me to step in for a little bit. So I gave them a couple of funny Ironman stories that had them all amused, just to fill in time. So again, I was part of a bit of that community. So I've become part of the community because of Ironman, or my experience of Ironman.
So imagine a storm blows in and this bottle washes up onto the shore of Lake Taupo, and you're just going for a bit of an amble along the waterfront, and you think, geez, that's an unusual looking bottle. And you go and pick it up and you pull the lid off, and this genie comes out and says, Verna, I grant you 3 wishes. What are the 3 things that you would like to have happen to improve Ironman New Zealand? What would your 3 wishes be?
Oh, you're getting a bit political there.
It's okay.
Oh, I want the welcome function back and the board's function back. I mean, that was what made it ultra unique. Yeah, I really do. And in other ways, well, I've been and volunteered at Tenby Ironman and Zurich Ironman, and the one in Britain, Bolton, yeah, Ironman. We do actually treat people much better here. And I just would like to get back to the really personalised things again. Like everybody used to get a poster, everybody used to get a certificate automatically. So I'd just like to get it a little bit more personalised, yeah. And that wouldn't take much, because the only reason that's not the case now is because the whole organisation has changed. It's become a worldwide big major thing, and I understand that. But you did ask me if a genie came, what would I do?
Yeah.
And it would be to bring those 2 functions back. I know I went to the one down there and it was nice, but it's not quite the same. And I went to the awards, but because there's only a percentage turn up, and it's a shame, because what I used to love about those functions was it would get, especially first timers, it would really get them into it. It would make them feel part of the family. And whether it was the welcome function, indoor function, or the awards afterwards, they would feel so much more part of it and so much more unique about what a unique thing that they've done. And I'd do that, and I would give them a certificate. Simple stuff. And because we used to get the programs, one of the big things I used to love seeing all the locals holding those printed programs with the names, race names and everything on it. Yeah. And that was great. For all the locals that used to come in the local paper. Yeah, get that back. But of course, it's like everything. Things have to change. Our government's finding the same. Take away the school lunches, take away the functions, Yeah. So I understand.
You better look out for that bottle washing up on the shoreline.
Yeah. Well, that's simple things. And so many of them are easy things. And they just need one person to work on that. And that's what used to happen in the old days when it was Jane Patterson or Jeanette Douglas or Maria Walker or Foy. That was their full-time job. Whereas now all the poor Ironman people are working on so many other events, like the Tarawera Challenge 2 weeks beforehand. And there's only so much focus that they can have. Whereas in those days it was all just one focus by one person. It made a big difference. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sounding like an old person now. Good old days.
No, you're not.
Not at all. Not at all.
No. Looking. Sometimes you need to look back to go forward. Yes. And to that end, Verna, look, Cameron and I are hugely grateful to have you as a guest on the Old School Try Show. It's been an absolute pleasure for us. You are so much a part of the DNA of this event, and we're so grateful to you for giving up your time to chat with us. It's been wonderful.
Oh, loved it. Just like all the others have said. I've loved it. It's been great. Thank you.